Yeah, I think it's time to start as planned 9:30 EST. Yeah, good morning, good evening, everyone. So today we are planning to take you through the training on computer system validation. So this is a kind of a topic of discussion for about 20-25 years in the pharma industry, but we thought of taking some effort to again go back into the history and then what we have come up so far, and then train team who are interested to explore in the computer system validation area. So that's the objective of this session. Um, we have primarily intended to have this session focused for Canadians who are residing and looking for a job in Canada to help them train in the computer system validation. But however, this is open for all, and anybody who is interested can benefit from listening to this. By default, anybody who joins will be muted. Please raise your hand in Teams if you want to ask any question. I will unmute the person if you want to talk, and then if you have any questions, you can ask the question. You don't need to wait till the last moment. I'll give a break during the session or when you raise a hand or when I see multiple hands, then we'll take a break and then discuss if you have any questions. Or you can always drop in a message. Yeah, I see still people joining, so I'm just giving 1 or 2 minutes more to get started. So hope people are able to listen to me, right? So of course I cannot hear your feedback. Yeah, thumbs up. So we'll exactly start by 9:35 in a minute. Okay, for anybody who has joined in last 2 minutes, so today we are going to go through the session on kind of a training on computer system validation. This is more intended for the people who are new in the industry and then who wants to explore computer system validation area. The session is primarily intended for Canadians, but as I was saying before, this is open for everyone. Anybody who is interested can benefit from this. By default, anyone who joins will be muted. So please raise your hand if you have any questions or if you want to ask, talk, or if you have any questions. Or you can also message on the Teams. I'll be able to see your comments as well as when you raise a hand, I'll be able to immediately respond. Don't have to wait till the end. As we go through, you can always ask questions. This is not a completely a new topic. Computer system validation has been there for over 20-25 years, so we are not going to talk anything new. So I would like to cover some of the basics and discuss more on how things are going currently and how computer system validation is adopted in various organizations and what are the new concepts in this area, right, from computer software assurance. Yeah, let's get started. Oh, this session is primarily planned for split into multiple different sections where initially I will start with the introduction and to the computer system validation, and then we'll talk about some of the need, why there is a need for doing the computer system validation, what are the regulations that require the validation, and then we will go and talk about planning and strategizing the computer system validation process, and then we will look at various deliverables that are part of computer system validation. After that, we'll talk about in general different SDLCs and how different computer system validation is adapted in different SDLCs. Also, we'll specifically cover testing and validation activities within the computer system validation, how the testing will be performed is what we will cover. And then data integrity and security. We'll touch upon the importance of data integrity and security. And then again, we will touch upon a high level at how the validation is done for the cloud-based systems or the SaaS, software as a service systems. We'll talk about change control and periodic review. And briefly, there's more of a discussion. Now we'll talk if you have any questions, and then during that time we can take up any case studies and best practices that the currently industries are following and how we want to cover, how we can, if you have, we'll respond to your questions. Before we get started, a little bit of introduction about me. My name is Vanmihinathan Balakrishnan. You can call me VB. I have over 20 years of experience in the life sciences area. I initially started with my career for about 6 years to 8 years in the pharma industry. I was working in the domain as a process engineer as well as the automation and process validation engineer. And then moved into IT. I spent initial few years in SAP implementation and validation, and then multiple support services for pharma industries, focused in SAP validation, IT infrastructure qualification, and validation of multiple other document management system and other enterprise applications. Okay, so let's delve into the actual presentation. I really wanted to take you all through a brief introduction of, brief history of how this validation evolved right from the beginning. So about 1970, it was to Food and Drug Administration officials Ted Bayes and Bud Loftus is initially put up the thoughts around computer system validation. Uh, there was a first UK Orange Guide, and that was titled as Guide to Good Pharmaceutical Manufacturing Practices. That was published in 1971, but then it didn't have the stress on validation. And the similar time frame around 1978, the US released the 21 CFR parts 210 and 211. Still in the original release, there was not much of stress on the validation, but around 1983, so the word validation was included, and the focus around validation was talked in both UK Orange Guide as well as 21 CFR Part 210 and 211. By then, the 21 CFR Part 11 was released and accepted by FDA. Also, around 2004, the FDA published pharmaceutical CGMPs for the 21st century. That's when the risk-based approach, the concept of risk-based approach, and the discussion around the risk-based approach was more predominant. During the time, right from 2005 to 2009, the ICH, International Conference for Harmonization, started releasing multiple guidelines around CGMPs, GLPs, GCPs like E6, E7, E9, E8, and that talked about quality risk management, risk-based validation, all that concepts. I would say right from 2004 to 2005, then till 2008, there was multiple discussions, and during similar such webinars was happening, and there was more talk about the validation. And around 2007, there was the ASTM standard for was published, ASTM E2500. That is still a quite eminent standard that is talking about the validation requirements. In 2015, next 15 talks about qualification and validation was published by EU. And the very latest advancement in the topic of discussion in the validation is the computer software assurance. FDA published the draft guidance for computer software assurance on 2022. So here we are, and again going back and talking about computer system validation today. I'm not going to talk too much about computer software assurance today. That's a little more advanced, but I really want to focus on the basics and the way we have come across. So knowing this history will always help you when you implement, bring in any concept. So it's always better to know the history, why the concept was introduced, and what is the need for it. So we just briefly looked at the history. When we look forward, what will happen to the validation is a quick thought. So you can also give your thoughts. This is going to stay. Validation is going to stay. It will be an integral part of the regulatory requirements on the manufacturing components of the healthcare environment. So this is not going to go anywhere. But there's going to be more of different concepts that we are going to talk in validation. The concepts could be around leveraging the product life cycle. So this has been a concept been there quite a while when GAMP 5 was released. GAMP 5 already focused leveraging the SDLC for the validation. But still, this is not effectively implemented in many of the organizations. That could be the focus area that we can see. And of course, again, the risk assessment and the controls at design. We are already talking about risk management, risk-based approach, and everything right from 2005 or even before. Again, this is a concept not well understood or not rightly implemented. So we'll The stress will go more on the risk assessment in the design phase. And then finally, I would expect the data-driven process validation will be the scope of future. So we'll focus more on the data. Then our risk assessment will be also primarily focused on data. So that's the future that we are expecting, but things could change. We'll wait and see. Okay, in quick basics, what is computerized system validation? So I don't want to go and talk to you about definition of FDA that says the validation definition for validation, but to put in practical terms, validation is nothing but common sense the approach to deliver the end-to-end user requirements. It's nothing but common sense, right? So which is not very common. That's how we should look at when you apply the logical skills and then look at how you want to deliver the end user requirements and complying with the regulations, and that's when you meet the computer system validation. So you don't need to do anything special. It's more of a common sense approach. That's what I would say. We need to ensure the quality is right built into the system at every step and not tested at the end, as we all now plan to do the validation and focus more on testing, saying that I have validated it. It's not. The quality must be built in right in every step of the system development, right from planning, design, requirements, design, testing, and reporting. So demonstrating GXP. So I'm not going to go about the GXP term right now, but we will look at into the later slides. The system when we validate that is supposed to demonstrate the GXP, that is the controls and regulations required by the different regulatory bodies. We should be able to demonstrate how we meet the controls. And then with no doubt, the computer system validation should meet the intended purpose. And I again want to stress that validation does not equate only to testing. We still call and interchangeably say validation a word replacement for testing, but it is not. Validation is a umbrella term that governs right from planning to reporting. Testing is one phase within the validation. However, the documented testing is the most predominant and most important phase in the validation life cycle, but that's not only like validation. So why do we validate? Everybody, we think that we validate to meet the regulations mandated by the different regulatory bodies. But a simple statement is do not kill people. So that's the basis. Even regulations come up with these stringent regulations and demand for a process to be in place for validation. Simply say why do we validate is not to kill people. At the end, we are the consumers of the drug, so it's for us. It's not for anybody new or outside the world. So it's for us. Then if we look at the reasons why do we need to validate, are we really confident that at any point in time the computer system is doing exactly what we intended to do? Yeah, this is one way to prove that the computer system is doing what we intended to do. That's the validation is a process that helps prove and demonstrate that. Now, of course, many recalls and everything is happening primarily due to non-validated process. And then data integrity and fraud is definitely under scrutiny by the regulator since quite long. of course, with no doubt, business needs as the regulators mandate. As the regulators mandate, this becomes a need for business. And now it is very important for any business to ensure that there is a validation process in place, then systems are validated. And a lot of people think that the validation will increase the cost in the life cycle. But yes, if it is not rightly implemented, but if it is rightly implemented, the validation is supposed to reduce the cost in entire system life cycle. There was a phase like during 2000s, the cost of project implementation went up high due to the additional factor of validation. But the cost is not calculated only by the implementation, but also has to be looked into the cost of not complying with the quality. How much we spend if we don't meet the quality is a cost that needs to be considered. Just would like to clarify the difference between validation and verification. FDA already harmonized the terminologies verification and validation, and these are treated as two different terminology. But however, many articles and um, things talk about are interchangeably use verification and validation term interchangeably. But there are proper definitions for validation and verification. To simply put, verification is something that is more like, are we building the product right? That what it means, like it's not just the English word, but it also says that if there is a design specification, the verification will conform to the design. But validation is little more than verification, and that also verifies, are we building the right product? That means, are we delivering the user requirement? Are we delivering the controls required by the regulatory bodies? Is the main intended use case of validation. So that's a little bit of a difference in understanding between validation and verification. To put in practically, verification more will go into the testing phase. Validation is again umbrella term that's covering the whole phases, including planning to reporting, primarily focused on intended use of the system. Yeah, how do we validate? So of course, the planning, specification, configuration, verification, reporting is a V model, basic V model that is suggested by GAMP, and that is still in use, even though there are multiple phases included in between and various deliverables included. But however, the basic concept of V model still remains the same. But what differentiates the different systems? Like we should focus on the quality, data integrity, and the patient safety. That would be the focus of validation, and we have to plan ahead of time. It applies for anything, but yeah, of course, for validation as well, and gather requirements. These two phases are the predominant phase in any validation. When we are clear in what we need to deliver, that is the requirements, and about plan. If we are clear in that, our validation process is simple. Then use a science and risk-based approach. This has been a talk for long, but this is still not very understood. We still will go in little detail of the name of risk-based approach. Then what we really need to do, but what we are not doing, we'll talk about that. But that's still a key need in the validation and review of the design. And this phase is very important before we go and implement the system. At this stage, we review all the requirements are properly designed so that we are confident. Then we don't need to look back, and then we test it after the implementation. That's when our if design review has been good, then we should not see a bigger challenges during the testing. And the validation does not end at the time of implementation. We need to have processes and procedures in place and trained people in place to maintain the validated state of the system. Of course, finalize the summary. That's important for demonstrating to the regulators that, yeah, this is how we did validate the system. Yeah, this is more of a text, but I would like to cover what really we mean by risk-based approach. Um, right, and GAMP 5 came in. So the risk-based approach was talk, and then everybody wanted to implement risk-based approach. Specifically, GAMP 5 talked about risk complexity and novelty of the system. That is, the effort should be based on risk complexity and novelty of the system. In the recent years, risk-based approach has been adopted within the industry. Right now, where we are focusing primarily on testing. So even the developments in computer software assurance is one of the outcome of the risk-based approach, where we are going to focus more on what is important, test more what is important. Focus on the GXP critical requirements. Yes, everything needs to be tested, but what requires the documentation and process control will be more applied for the GXP critical requirements. So that way, risk-based approach will eliminate the cost involved, but at the same time, we maintain the quality required. Since we talked about a couple of times about GAMP, just wanted to touch upon what is GAMP. GAMP is a kind of a subcommittee within ISPE. The community promotes the understanding of the regulations and the use of automated systems within the pharmaceutical industry. GAMP itself was founded in 1991 in UK, but however, when it joined with 1994 with ISP and published the GAMP, started publishing the GAMP guidelines. GAMP has multiple guidelines and articles. There are annexures and appendices in each GAMP guideline. So those are still used as one of the standard guidelines for the validation. The drivers for GAMP is actually coming from before GAMP there were only regulations. There is no specific guideline that clearly says how a validation needs to be done. So without that, there was not a clarity in how to do the validation. So it provided the scalable approach to GXP compliance and brought in the effective supplier relationship and use of existing documentation and knowledge. Before GAM, the use of SDLC was not thought before, and configurable systems and development models. GAM provided an approach for different systems, like different based on the criticality of the system and the way it is configured. It provided different approaches, and then focused on product quality, patient safety, and data integrity, critical quality attributes, continuous improvement within QMS, quality by design. There is ICH guideline as well on quality by design, improving GXP compliance efficiency, effective governance to achieve and maintain GXP compliance, and then life cycle approach within QMS, science-based quality management risks. So I see there are some comments in chat. Let me quickly. Yeah, looks like my audio is not. Let me. I don't know. Probably it's due to the Teams. Let me try and speak loud. Yes, I will be sharing the recording after the session. And is screenshots mandatory in testing? Yeah, that's a It looks like there are people waiting in lobby. For some reasons, I don't see anyone appearing. Yeah. So is screenshots necessary for testing? Uh, the answer I would start with say no, but the reason why we need a screen print is for moving more for going back and referring. So if we testing, we need to trust the tester. The tester is trained and then binding to the organization policies and procedures to test the system. And if a tester says yes, this is meeting the expected results and this is good to go, and we need to trust. Still, why are we taking screen prints? The screen prints are more for root cause analysis. In case in future, if there is any challenge, if we need to know what was the scenario then, what was the configuration then, how was the screen looking like, how was the steps, how did the system react. Yeah, we said the step passed, but did we document the configuration? In those scenarios, the screen prints will be necessary, or sometimes we can also document the actual results at the time of configuration, but it's more easier, convenient than documenting what was the scenario. It's better to take the screen print. So that is the need for screen print. Otherwise, the screen print for mere purpose of proving that I did the testing, it is not the intended use of taking the screen print. Take the screen print only if you think the data is required to be referred in the later time, primarily focusing on the configuration details, not to prove that you did the testing. That's where the tester says, yeah, I did the testing and signs across the step. How is GAMP related to the other regulations? GAMP, even when the 4 was released, that time itself, the GAMP synchronized with other regulations as well. The GAMP 5 even increased it. So GAMP is definitely still is one of the guideline that is very comprehensive. And a single guideline that encompasses all the requirements in different regulations and different standards like ASTM, even it includes ITIL, ISO. So, for example, if you take infrastructure qualification, ITIL is a standard, and when GAMP provides a guideline, it considers the controls coming from ITIL, and then it doesn't ask you to completely do a new thing. So it aligns with different standards and regulations, and still this is one of the comprehensive guideline that we still use. We'll go a little more into detail, but at this stage, GAMP defines the life cycle phases as the concept phase, project phase, operation phase, and retirement. This is the typical life cycle phases for any system. During the concept phase is when then we come up with the requirements and planning. This is a quite a lengthy phase in typically as we spend time in the concept phase, that is planning and defining the requirements, we will be able to do the successful validation. Then during the project, that's when the requirements are finalized, we do the GXP assessment and do the project. That is right from defining plan, requirements, design, testing, and then reporting and release is the project phase. The operation phase is the phase where the system is in use by the users. This phase is usually longer because the system, properly validated system, will be in use for longer time, and during that time will undergo multiple changes as the need for the system and the requirement for the system changes. There could be bugs, there could be requirement changes that will call for multiple changes. That's why the change management process and other operating administrative process will help guide the operation phase. And during the retirement, yes, there's a regulation governing the retirement as well, how we archive the data and then keep ready data for any future users depending on the data criticality and regulatory requirement on the data. Yeah, this is the same flow, but little stresses on giving a kind of overview on what happens in the project and operation phases. In the project phase, typically we are doing one V model, but in operation phase, multiple V models depending on uh, the scope and the risk of the change. So the operation phase is going to be with multiple change requests, small or big. That could be a big upgrade, that could be a small change, but that's when the changes. I see a few more people joining. Yeah. Yeah, multiple change requests and other. I will talk about all the operational procedures that we are expected to have during the operation phase. But during that time, we will encounter multiple projects. We talked about GAMP and we also talked about GAMP 5. I didn't go into details of GAMP 5, assuming that GAMP, we all know GAMP 5. Just wanted to touch base on many of you are aware that there is a second edition published by GAMP 5. On what is it different? Let's just focus on what is it different in second edition. GAMP 5 actually, there is no big change like how GAMP changed from 4 to 5, right? There's no big change in GAMP 5, but it literally expands the scope and the concepts to the recent technology changes. So that's the major change in GAMP 5 second edition. One of them is non-linear recognition. What does it mean? So GAMP 5, even though I talked about it supports agile and other different SDLCs in GAMP 5, the things have changed a lot in the recent years. So GAMP 5 gives more flexible room for adapting any non-linear or non-waterfall lifecycle methodology. It expands its scope for multiple different life cycles, life cycle models. And document change. As it starts supporting the nonlinear or multiple different SDLCs support the respective documents, the way how we write the user requirements. We cannot expect to have all the requirements finalized for the entire system, for a very large system than the very beginning of the project. So the agile model is prevalent now. So it supports how we need to develop documents when we follow a different SDLC. So that's a document change. And critical thinking, with no doubt, critical thinking has been talked even in GAMP 5, but it expands the scope for critical thinking and reduced effort based on the risk. Prioritizes critical thinking. Update of the development appendices. So whoever looked into GAMP, you can always look at the development appendices. GAMP has got appendices for multiple document deliverables, including user requirements, design, and everything. So looking into those appendices will actually help you understand how we need to prepare the documents. Actually, GAMP added a couple of additional appendices on the for the document development, and GAMP supports ITIL. The support and scope for the ITIL is increased. The standard for the infrastructure. Even I wouldn't say this wasn't in GAMP 5, but the scope is expanded. So there's nothing new so far actually. And this is something which I am kind of very much interested, and I am expecting this will grow in future as well. The new appendix about blockchain and distributed ledger technology. This is still in very early phase. You can read in detail if you get a GAMP edition 2, GAMP 5 edition 2. There's a new appendix about blockchain and distributed ledger technology. It was a technology was there right from 1980s, which actually verifies when a transaction is completed. Without trust, it goes by the verification. So this will actually replace many of the transactions or any communications in the regulated area. I am expecting there will be more future in this area. Let's see. And there is there has been a talk about AI and machine learning for about recent years, and GAMP has added additional appendix about AI and machine learning. These two are completely new. And the new appendix about the use of agile within the GXP environment. Yes, GAMP5 talked about the agile methodology, but didn't go in detail. But now there's a separate appendix. And there's a new appendix about modern infrastructure and infrastructure management. The infrastructure especially has changed over a period, and there are modern technologies. It's not what we used 10 years before. The infrastructure can do multiple things. So there's a new appendix that covers all about. So this is a difference at high level, but I would recommend you all get a copy of this and look into GAMP5. Still, this is the one of the best guideline for the industry. It will enable you to think, apply your logical skills. It doesn't directly tell you what need to do, but it will help in your thinking process. Determining GMP impact. Before we start any validation, the validation is the requirement that is coming when there is a GXP requirement. We'll talk about what is GMP. I intentionally moved such GXP slides a little later because I assume that you all would know what is that, but still we'll cover that. So GXP is the need why validation is being done. Hence, we need to first identify if a system falls in the GXP category. Then we apply the validation concepts and validation process for that system. I'll briefly touch upon the validation planning and different deliverables, how we need to do. These are some slides that are mostly text, but will be some of the quick contents that you will see. Let me see if there are any comments. Yeah, so GAMP 5 second edition, I would not be able to share a copy because that's not a version that I can share publicly. But going forward, I'll start publishing some of the interpretations of the GAMP appendices. I believe that will be more useful and we will start discussing more on it. I cannot definitely publish the direct document. Yeah, I see a question about AI based visual tablet inspection system. Can we put such questions towards the end by the time when we understand? It may not be right now. Not everybody can understand, but yes, we will cover it up. If anything I don't cover, please don't hesitate to send me an email later. We'll look into that. So the validation plan is required for all the validation. So I have seen many places the validation will not be, plan is not directly done. So planning is an important document. Don't just use it for delivering just one deliverable. So the validation plan would actually define what activities are required. That's where you will say what activities that you are going to do based on the criticality novelty of the system. That's where you define the validation plan. So that will be very useful to justify to the regulators. Yes, this is what I planned because of this, and this is why. And these are the deliverables. developed based on my plan. So planning is a very important document for you to plan your activities and also to demonstrate to the auditors. So, what will help you to determine the plan and the deliverables is like the system impact on the patient safety. Always keep this as the very first question. How it impacts the patient safety, product quality, and data integrity. This will be the very first question that should come to you whenever you have any query like, do I need to do this or no? System complexity and novelty. Yes, how complex is the system and how new is the system in the market? That also will add additional testing in the validation planning. So that would be your justification for doing not heavy testing on any system that is in the industry for quite long, and how why you do a more testing for a very new application in the industry. And outcome of supplier assessment. Uh, GAMP, right from GAMP 4 and even GAMP 5, it started recommending the use of the supplier deliverables as much as the suppliers quality management and suppliers deliverables. So GAMP is recommending and trying to reduce the effort of validation by the users by utilizing the supplier assessments. Always the responsibility of the validation will be with the user of the application, or to be precise, the process owner. But the process owner can delegate and get the things done, but always responsibility lies with the user or the process owner. That means the acceptance will be done by the process owner and quality unit. The validation plan would typically include introduction, scope, system overview. This is where you will clearly define the boundaries of the system, the organizational structure, validation strategy. This is where you will say why I'm doing this validation and what are the deliverables. And then list of validation deliverables. We'll talk about validation deliverables and terminologies that have changed in the recent time. And there's a slide about it. And then specifically we'll say what is the acceptance criteria to accept the system for the production use. And then change control, SOPs for the maintenance, and supporting processes for any support requirement. All this will be covered in the validation planning. So here is a typical approach for different categories as defined by GAMP. The categories have been there right from GAMP 4, and this still provides on looking at the system, it still provides a high level effort required for any validation. For GAMP category 1, it's more of recording the version number and verify the current installation by the approved procedure. But this GAMP category 1 is now little changed in a way with the advancements in the IT infrastructure. So that's where the new appendix in the GAMP edition 2 talks about. The concept did not change. The GAMP category still, 1 is still in place, but what we consider in GAMP category will change. Not all infrastructure will now come into GAMP category 1. GAMP category was 2 was there and now removed. One of the biggest reason for removing the GAMP category 2 is like it is no more the way we thought it to be. All the category 2 is more configurable now. That's the reason it's merged with GAMP category 3. So and that is with 3, it's a typical life cycle. We don't do a user-based configuration, but still there is a configuration to implement the system. That's a one-time verification of the configuration, typical user requirements, supplier assessment, and then the testing and summary is good enough for completing the validation for category 3. The 4 and 5 is the majority of the validation that we do. 4 intends to be all the configurable systems, and 5 goes for all the custom build applications. Nowadays, many organizations don't go for custom build organizations. Yeah, even though there are many, there are products and services coming up in the category 4, more of which is in the GAMP category 4. Of course, still 5 is there. But when in the product based, with the software development, there is more of GAMP category 4 than 5 nowadays. Quality risk management. It's a systematic process of the assessment, control, communication, and review of risks. So it is right from assessment, control, communication, and the review of risks. It is an iterative process used throughout the entire computer system lifecycle from concept to retirement. And the risk management is not a one-time activity. It is applied at the beginning of the validation and also till the retirement. Even before retirement, we need to assess the risk related to the system and then plan for the retirement. Okay. This needs to be understood well, how we implement the quality risk management. A lot of the times I see risk management or the risk-based approach is applied only during the testing. We identify all the requirements, write down each requirement and do the assessment of risk, like whether the requirement is high, medium, low. But that wouldn't be the best way to do the risk management. The ideal risk management should come from the business process and the user and regulatory requirements, not the individual requirement that we written, but where is the system going to be used? And what is the risk associated if anything goes wrong? What is the risk associated if there is a control not enabled? So that's the level of discussion should go through in each project. If there is no risk, then we can say this is not a risk, and yes, this is a possible risk, and this is the control that we already have. And then we talk about project approach, contract methods, and timelines. These also will possess a risk. And then system components and architecture. So after defining the requirements, the system components and architecture itself also will possess a risk. Like given that there are now data privacy and security related concerns that are in industry, then definitely the system components and architecture will also pose a risk. And then system functions. This is more to align to the requirements and experience from use. Of course, from the past experience, anybody can provide the input. So focus your risk assessment in a way that you keep a session on discussing with all the people involved in the areas that I listed in the input section. Discuss, this can only come up from the discussion. Discuss more on what could go wrong. And that is the only way that we will be able to identify the risk. Don't limit anything, document anything that can go wrong, and then come up with the controls and measures for each identified risk scenarios. It's not listing down the risks into high, medium, low. I mean requirements into high, medium, low. That is not exactly risk assessment, but documenting what can go wrong is the risk assessment, and then doing analysis about that. So perform the, yeah, I don't need to talk more about that. Once we identify the possible risks, then we can always manage how to assess, evaluate, and then control the risk. Can category 4 application be modified with minor customization, and is it acceptable? Yes, regulations never say what you can do, what you cannot do, but whatever you do, you validate it. Yes, definitely category 4 can be customized to the need basis. Many times that is the case. But whatever the component that we are customizing, focus more. So that's where all the critical thinking and the CSA concepts stress more. So now in a category 4 application for a system which is long used in the industry, we will just verify only the configuration. But if we modify something or customize something, our focus, that's where the that's the outcome of the critical thinking, and our testing will be more. Yeah, kindly cover importance of CSV in medical device industry. I actually didn't focus this specifically for medical device industry, but we'll try and do in a separate blog in future. But yes, the medical device industry, based on the device class, the importance and the effort that goes in the computer system validation will drastically change. There can be devices that just measures that glucose monitoring, or something that goes in as a pacemaker. So there's a lot difference. Right now we are not going to go in detail, but yes, we can plan it sometime. There's a question about validation plan, make it generic. Can we make it generic, like not including all things, because of some things based on the risk-based testing, we cannot perform or follow some mentioned tasks as per VP. What I would recommend here is don't try to produce the validation plan very first deliverable before. Yes, it is the very first deliverable, but keep it open. The requirements phase will still go on for quite some time. You will not be able to freeze all the requirements. Before we go to the design, once we are clear on the design, that's when you will not approve the requirements, but that's when you would have started the validation plan, but you don't need to route it for the approval or approve and finalize the plan well ahead of the time without knowing what exactly we are going to do, or without clarity on the scope of the requirement. I would recommend to keep the validation plan open until we freeze the requirements. It doesn't mean that requirements needs to be approved for validation plan, but we have the clarity on the requirements. That's when we finalize the validation plan. Validation plan is definitely a key document to document your strategy, deliverables, and what you are going to cover in the validation plan. So at some time you might have not covered certain areas. In those times, don't hesitate to go back and revise the validation plan. Probably after the design phase, you have always option to go back and revise the validation plan to consider the changes that has happened during the design phase. Yeah, there are a few questions. I'm thinking that I can spend some time in these questions as well, so that will keep you all engaged as well. So some slides are like more of text. Why can't the screen record instead of screen printing? You mean a video recording? I don't exactly get. If you are referring to video recording as the screen record, yes, it's possible. As long as we provide the evidences rightly available, screen print is more easy to keep it in the document and then showcase. Record needs if it's a screen navigation recording, it needs a player. But any type of evidence is required. But as I said before, the evidence is not to prove that you did the testing. The evidence is more to go back and check what was the condition then. When the system boundary shall propose at which phase? I believe you're asking about when the system boundary shall be finalized, right? So during the requirement phase, the system description, including the boundary, has to be documented, and during the design phase, it will have to be finalized. If I'm using the software on 5 years later, I will migrate, but some features is not working. Shall I keep the application software, or only data is enough? Yes, this is more about the retirement. And if you are retiring any application, yes, data is more important. But how would you read the data? If you have different ways to read the data, you don't need the application to be in place. If the data is not readable without the application, yes, you need to have a instance of the application as well, in case of product recalls or in case of any root cause analysis or any post-marketing study. So the objective is data must be retrievable. It's not about the application. Which one is best, agile or waterfall? There's nothing best or worst. So it's all based on the need of the industry, different industry, and based on the needs, the SDLC model will change. So the AI based visual, so I have a different concept around the AI based, so which I didn't plan to cover it in this slide, but that it's also is a separate discussion. Probably we can have one quick an hour session in future for the artificial intelligence based how we can handle the validation of AI. We'll talk more about that. So that's a kind of a more of an area where we need to discuss more. How the pre-validated system accepted like infrastructure software as we cannot validate for the features, how it will become. There is nothing called pre-validated system. So don't go by the word pre-validated system. There is nothing called pre-validated system. Nobody can validate. And there was a slide I talked about process owner or the end user is the only person responsible for validation. The validation is with end user. Yes, of course, we can leverage what supplier has done, but nobody can pre-validate for your need. Yeah, these are good questions. This is good to discuss as well. So let me carry on with the sessions. The user requirement specification. The URS defines clearly, precisely what the regulated company requires the system to do. URS is very, very important. All your planning level activities will be done in the validation plan. URS has to be very precise and clearly document requirement in the document. It has to be unique. It has to be verifiable. It has to be clear. All our validation is focused on this. When you finally produce a summary report that says the validation is I see there is a hand raised. Yeah. So I think I can grant access to Epic says. Hello, Mike.
Hello, sir.
Hello, sir. Hey, Epic. Yeah, please. You wanted to have any
my
question?
name is Ashraf from Isra. I want to know what is the revalidation frequency of computer system validated equipment. In initial stage, if I qualified my equipment along with qualification activity, after performance qualification, what's the revalidation frequency of you can mean that re-review validation frequency of any equipment?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'll keep you on mute and then I will go on responding to this. Yes, periodic review is one of the requirement that came up in EU regulations around mid of 2000s. And now it is important and a key requirement in many other regulations as well. The periodic review, yes, I have a slide about it as well. The validation phase does not end once you build and then release the system for the use. It has to be maintained for the future use. That's when the change management system and all the controls are being applied. You will define the periodic review of the system based on the criticality of the system, how critical is to your process and how well you have defined your support process. It could typically in the industry, it could range from 1 year to 3 years. Every 1 year, you may reassess your system, or for some low critical systems, you may do the periodic assessment for every 3 years. Typically, during the periodic review, you will address all the changes that have taken up during the past 1 year or 3 year in the period of that time. and then you will assess if there are any additional requirements that are required for the system, and have there been any deviation from the planned procedures. You will look at all the deviations from the planned procedures. These are the things that you will typically do in the periodic review, but there is no regulation never says what frequency, but that leaves it to you based on the criticality of the system. But typically in the industry, it ranges from 1 year to 3 years.
Can you unmute me? Yes. Actually, I have facing during every audit, you know that some admin rights have been
Were you talking? Or you can drop in your message. Yeah, please go on.
Yes, admin rights by mistakenly change the password policy of the equipment. So during verification, meanwhile, I can create some appendix and some checklist during a periodic review of the any equipment based on which cover all syspq parameters.
Yeah. See, that shows if admin again depends on the criticality of the system. The admin level access also to be monitored. That means the control over the system, the access control is not rightly put in. So that's what you need to control. Nothing wrong in coming up with these issues during the periodic review, but you will implement additional control based on the issue. So once you identify the issues in the system, like somebody has changed the password policy, that is a very key risk. The immediate step is that you come up with the incident and document the COPPA. That will talk about how are you going to immediately fix the issue that you have identified, and from the time it has happened, you will have to go back and review whether it has impacted whether it has any impact on the product quality and the patient safety is what you will go back and do the analysis. And if there is any impact, then you will have to address that. Otherwise, you will summarize the need for this. So this has to be closed with a COPPA, that is corrective action and preventive action, by analyzing the issues that would have caused during the time it was enabled. Okay, so let me move on to the next slides. The requirements has to be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and testable. So each of these words is not just for defining the requirement. These are very important. You will realize when you actually do the testing, oh, I didn't write the user requirement this way to prove my testing. Right, so this can only come from the experience. But remember, when you, as a validation person, when you review the requirement, you have to ensure that it is specific, measurable, achievable. Writing a requirement that is not measurable is not going to help anyone, and writing a requirement that is not achievable is again not going to help anyone, right? So, and even if it cannot be tested, then we will find it very difficult at the time of summarizing to say how we are going to summarize the testing or validation is complete. So all these 5 are very important when defining a user requirement. I am spending more time in the user requirements and the planning phase because that's more important. As I told in the beginning, most of us spend time in the testing, but that will reduce if we spend more time in planning and requirements definition, and especially requirements definition is very key. And this shows the specific enough for testing and checking, unambiguous, clear, precise, self-contained. That again defines how a requirement should be and how that would help during the testing. And then functional specification. So this is a deliverable that depends on the size of the system or the GAMP category. For a system that needs to be further expanded from the user requirement, needs a functional specification. Any system that needs additional developments would need a functional specification. This is where more of the business consultants who interpret the business user requirements to the specification. They write the functional specification and they interpret the user requirements for the developer and put it in the functional specification. So that's the objective. When you understand the objective of the deliverable, then you will be able to clearly document it. Or as a validation person in your organization, you can guide your team as well, how a document should come in. User requirement is a specific requirement from the end user. Functional specification is more of a document that interprets the user requirement to a developer or a person who is going to configure the system. Not every requirement, it's not always necessary to have a functional specification for each requirement. Only the requirements that need to be interpreted for the development needs to be added with the functional specification. Here, don't stress yourself to write functional specification for each requirement. Go by the logical analysis of where you need the functional specification. Configuration and design. Yeah, this is again either many of the requirements can be either configured or designed for the development. Wherever the requirement is configurable, and this mostly applicable for GAMP 3 as well as GAMP 4. The GAMP 3 I'm including because GAMP 3 by definition it is non-configurable product, but it is non-configurable for the user requirements, but still there could be some basic configurations to put the system into the environment. So again, each requirement either has to be configured or designed for the development. At this stage, don't limit yourself to the software design. The scope will also include hardware design as well. The different organizations take different way. There's a separate program for many organizations to do the infrastructure qualification separately. Or sometimes infrastructure qualification is covered within the validation. The same goes with process validation as well. So before you go for the process validation, you qualify the equipment. The same way, before you go for the application validation, you go for the IT infrastructure qualification. So the design phase would include the configuration and design phase would include both hardware as well as software. Yeah, since we're talking more about the IT systems, so we included a slide on software development. Software development is not directly governed by any regulation, but however, there are guidelines that talks about some of the controls required in a software development. Definitely, it is highly recommended for any organization who does the software development to have a coding standard in place against which the code review will be done. And then kind of a unit testing. Code review on unit testing has to be done at this stage. There is no regulation that directly tells you that you need to do, but all these requirements are coming from the guidelines like GAMP. Without a coding development, it is important for the coding standard. It is important for the organization itself to go back and look the development or for any future changes. If we don't follow a proper coding standard or a proper commenting system in place, after 5 years or 10 years, any new developer cannot read the code. So it is highly recommended control for the organization. The source code should be subject to a documented review. So if we need to do a source code review, there must be a software standard. Coding standard must be present. So look for both the things. So as a validation engineer, you should enforce these controls in the process. And the whole software has to be put into a configuration management, like any release management systems like Git or source code version control systems. And that is very important, that any non-reviewed or verified product is not released into the production environment. The version control management at the software level is very important. Yeah. Now we are touching upon the most discussed phase or most predominant phase in the validation, that is verification and testing. Depending on the risk that we did before, and depending on the requirements that we talked about before, the level of testing will vary. It can go from positive, negative, and repeatability testing, performance testing, then the volume and load testing, regression, structural testing. And there are different types of testing that you can do, but all that is based on the risk and complexity that you assessed for the system. Tests may be defined in one or more test specifications. Many times the controls are tested in multiple scripts, not one single scripts. Appropriate test strategies should be developed based on the risk, complexity, and novelty. Supplier document may be assessed and reused if suitable. So this could be a response to one of the question. When we document the validation plan, we may not know how our test strategy could be. Depending on the complexity of the system. Very large systems, we can only plan at the high level. So that's when the test strategy document, otherwise test protocol is important and is delivered after the design, during the design phase. Not every system will need a test strategy document. If we can cover that in the validation plan, we don't need a separate test strategy document. But for larger systems, sometimes we may not be able to cover in the validation plan itself. Hence, it's highly recommended to have a separate test strategy in place. So this is where a validation plan is important to define. What do I need and why did I prepare this document, or why did I not do this document? So validation plan will be your backup document forever. The test strategy should define which types of testings are required and the number of purpose of the test specifications. Yeah, of course, that's the intended purpose of test strategy. This is a typical structure of how a test deliverables will look out. We create a test plan or test strategy document. Again, this depends on the size of the system. Not every, this can be part of the validation plan itself. And then the test protocol or specification. Here, the protocol or specification is actually the test, what we need to test. Again, all these depends on the size of the system. Every time you will not be preparing this level. For when we validate a SAP system, we need such hierarchy of deliverables. But when we do a blister packaging line, then we will not do everything. So at the time, validation plan would be covered, and then we will have the test cases and the test results. That's it. Depending on the size of the system, the hierarchy could be different. Yeah. Validation reporting is the very first document that you will typically show it to a auditor. So summarize everything well in this document so that the auditor don't ask you to go back and get more documents, right? That way, validation reporting is very important document. And this is also place to, ideally, we should not wait here. That's where the RTM helps you to ensure that we didn't miss any activity. But again, this is a place where we will ensure that everything is covered as per the validation plan, what we planned. But theoretically, we should not wait till summary report to identify anything that we missed. Typically, validation report will cover the scope, supplier assessment activities that would justify our testing effort, summary of activities that we performed against the validation plan, summary of deliverables that we delivered against the validation plan, summary of deviations and corrective actions. Typically, sometimes I have seen in some organizations, we don't have a documented deviation management system or incident management system during the project phase. there are possibilities once that design is fixed. There could be reasons we could deviate from the plan, or we could deviate from the process, or sometimes an incident can happen. So we need to have a process defined in validation plan itself to manage such deviations and incidents during the project phase. That need not follow the organization's deviation management and incident management because the system is not in the production use, right? So hence that need not be controlled stringently, but that has to be still managed. Once the design is frozen, there should be a process defined by the validation plan for managing the deviation incidents during the project. And then the statement of fitness for intended use, that would come from the user requirement. Ideally, theoretically, it has to be same as what we defined in the user requirement, or sometimes the system use could be changed during the implementation phase. All the requirements might have not been met. Some requirements may be planned for future releases. In such areas, then we need to define what are the requirements that are implemented, and then maintaining the compliance and fitness for the intended use. So this is where the list of SOPs, I believe, are covered in the next slide. Yeah, we will define. So there are future slides coming up, we'll talk. So there's a question about what are the things to be covered in the supplier assessment. Yeah, this is a good question. So we said supplier assessment will reduce the effort that goes in the validation. But what do we need to assess, right? So again, everything goes by the criticality of the supplier. Depending on the supplier criticality, either we may do a remote assessment or a postal assessment or a in-person audit. For high critical systems, we may go and perform a in-person audit. During such audits, typically we will cover supplier's quality management system. If a supplier has the strong quality management system in the development process, then we don't need to go back and do all the development related testing. For example, if a software supplier has got his own software development standard, coding standard, and code reviews, everything is done well, and the user requirements unit testing is done, and all the integration testing is done, then most of our effort is taken up by supplier. We will only primarily focus on our user requirements testing. We can always leverage supplier assessment. So the supplier assessment typically will cover the assessment of the supplier quality management system, supplier SDLC process, supplier training, that is most important. How all the employees of the supplier is all trained in the regulatory requirements and the development processes. And then depending on the supplier's nature of the supplier, for example, if the supplier is hosting the platform, then we will look at their business continuity disaster recovery models. But if it is in-house implemented, then those controls we need to bring. So consider the supplier as part of the validation process. Whatever you can take from the supplier, but end responsibility is with the process owner. During the PR, we do need to perform any system testing because we reviewed all the validation documents, including SOP, change control, and deviation. What is PR here? Is it a change request? Because we reviewed all the validation docs, including periodic review, right? Okay, during periodic review, do we need to perform any system testing? No, periodic review does not mandate or you are not required to do that system testing. Periodic review is only the review of the validation document. Sometimes you will assess your validation system to your current standards. Recently, your organization might have changed the policy for validation, and it might need additional documents. You would have validated or qualified your system few years back, and that would have not met the current requirements. So typically you will assess all the validation deliverables against your current standard. Then you will review all the recent change controls during the past 1 or 3 years. You will assess all your incidents and deviations from the process during the past 1 or 3 years. You will go and review all the access logs to check if there is any unauthorized access. You will go back and check all your audit trials. You will check with the user if the user requirements are still met by the system, or is there any additional developments required. So the summary of periodic review will or may ask you to do additional things. For example, like there was another gentleman talked about password policy was changed. So that shows the control is not good in the system. So that will trigger action item after the periodic review. Sometimes it may trigger a testing if any additional requirements are added. And sometimes if it will ask you to initiate a COPPA if any incident that has happened that has gone unnotified. You will have to document that incident and you will do the COPPA for that incident. Yeah. Let's spend some time on the system operations. So establishing operational controls is the first step during the towards the end of the validation and before the summary report development. You will have to define the control requirements for your system, and that's the very first phase. Capture the operational control requirements. Oh, I don't know if the text is clear to you. For me, okay, I think something happened to the text. I don't know if it's only for me or for you as well, but let me brief that. See, during the capture operational control requirements is the phase where we will identify the specific controls required for the system. It could be the SOX related controls for a system in that is handling. Yeah, it's not clear. So don't bother. Just focus on the flow. I can briefly talk about it. There can be security controls. There can be controls related to the data privacy. So you will define the controls, what I need to control in the system. Defining this will actually help you determine what processes that you need to set up during the support and maintenance phase. And then we go to the design support phase. Once we define all the controls that we need to establish, then we go and design the support processes like information security management, ITIL related processes, that is service management policies, and then for backup and restore. During the phase, summary phase, you will identify what is the RTO and RPO, that is recovery time objective and recovery point objective needed for your system. Based on that, you will define your backup and restore processes, and you will also define how frequently you need to test your backup and restore processes. And then system administration process, like exactly the one example that came up in administration access should be highly controlled only with specific identified people, and again that has to be controlled by a change management procedural control. The admin, even though has got admin access, cannot anytime go and log into the system. That's where the audit trail will help you. There are systems that can log even admin actions, but some systems may not have that advanced controls and may not need it. So that's where the change management comes into process. Without an approved change request in place, the admin should not log in with the admin credentials. There is no need for admin to log in. There could be some operational procedures and routine management and maintenance areas. During that time, the admin can log in and do the routine activities. But otherwise, for any other actions, the admin cannot access the system without the authorization by the quality assurance. The routine activities may include like backup, restore, patching, maintenance. All that can be the actions which require admin access. Yeah. So I think there's a ask for the break as well. Yeah, that's a good point. Even I was just carried away. We'll come back and start with this. By the time I will also let me try and fix this text issue. We'll start with the operational controls. Break would be like, how much time do you think? 15 minutes, 30 minutes? 15 minutes is good enough. Right now it's 11 a.m. for me. Let's connect back at 11:15. I'll keep the system live. You can all stay in the call or leave and come back. We'll start at 11:15. That is exactly 15 minutes from now. Thank you. Thanks for the reminder. So hi everyone, I think we can get started again. Thanks for suggesting a break, and it was helpful for me too. Yeah, I've also fixed uh, the text issue that was not clear. So I think it was a font issue. I changed from Times New Roman to Calibrate. Now it's working. Yeah, so we were on this slide and we talked about how to capture the controls, and then how do we design the support process for the controls, and then we verify the process before we implement the process. This is a phase where we verify if the process works, right? And then we go and make the process effective. This is a standard process for making any SOP effective. We test and release, but the level of detail need not be applicable for all the processes, like again the size of the system. So these are the concepts that needs to be applied when we designing a operational control process, but depends on the size of the system as well. For the simple systems, we may not put this much effort, so it all comes with the experience. For any new systems or large complex systems, then we need to definitely put this additional effort to define the process. This is where the periodic review requirement comes in to verify the effectiveness of the processes in place. The periodic review should be intended to identify any weakness in the process or weakness in the system. That's how you will define your periodic review process itself. And the outcome of the periodic review is if the system is good or does it have any weaknesses. Then you will address your weakness. Typically, periodic reviewers will initiate a COPA after any, if there are any identifications from the periodic review. So that will be the outcome of periodic review. We discussed what do we review in the periodic review. I don't want to repeat it again. Yeah. So this diagram gives you process relationships. This is one of the concept that we should kind of understand to how to handle different issues in the system during the operation phase. Sometimes we will not be sure on how to handle any situation, right? So try to understand this flow and will help you. Once the system is live, any change or any incident or any deviation will have to be handled as service management request. It's you can call it any different name, but it is all a request. That's how it will be handled. During the project phase, things are different and the system is not live. You can make the changes as needed, guided by the validation plan. But once the system is live, anything has to be implemented during the using the controlled process in place. You cannot, and your process should allow you to do that. You will define the process for it and you will follow the process once the system is implemented. We can actually bucket different kind of requests that can come in. There could be some regular activities like administration activities, administration requests, user account management, patch updates, and there could be some security issues. So all that can be bucketed into a security and system administration process. Once you define a process for it, and you don't need a change request for these things, as long as you have a documented process. Oh, is the slide not larger? So yeah, I think I made the full view slide. Let's see. Um, So for these kind of regular activities, it is recommended to define a process, that is SOP, in place. Once you have a SOP, your activities will be governed by that SOP. You don't need a change control for every single action items. You will document some logs as guided by your SOP, but you don't need to change request. You don't need to create a change request. And with the other bucket is like you can keep all your system upgrades, functionality changes, new system requests, configuration changes, and any cosmetic changes, look and feel change for anything. It could be, it's like more of changes to the existing system. Can all, it's all a new requirement that all has to be handled in the change management. Your change management process will again identify based on the size, risk, and complexity of the changes requested. There could be different flows will be guided in your change management process, but all will come under the change management process. The change management sometimes could be large. It could be a simple change of fixing one bug, or it could be a major upgrade of an application. So depending on the size of the change, it could either trigger a complete end-to-end project management, or it could be a simple fix to the issue. So understand this interrelationship to the processes. The other bucket is incident, anything that happens unexpectedly. Any failure or any error, any requirement does not work as intended, any system failures, that is putting your system down, any incident, that is any unexpected event, all has to be handled as a incident management. So don't get confused with sometimes the change management process and the incident management process. Change management process is something planned. There is a bug in the system, but that is not stopping you from your continuing with your regular operations, but you want to fix that bug. That's a change management system. There's an issue in the system that doesn't allow you to release a product. Then that's an incident. So that has to be handled via an incident management process. The incident management, once the immediate action, depending on the severity of the incident, either sometimes we may go for emergency fix. Your process should allow how emergency fixes has to be handled. So understanding this whole requirement and your complexity will allow you to build your processes around the system. The incident management, sometimes if it is, I'm seeing a question between difference between the incident and deviation. Yeah, that's a good question. So that's where many places that we get confused, right? So there's a difference between incident and deviation. Incident is any event that occurs unexpectedly. Deviation is something that we deviate from the process. It could be a planned deviation or an unplanned deviation. Let me put this in a way, let me complete this on the flow. So when an incident or a failure or a error occurs, then it triggers the incident management system, and the incident management then triggers the CAPA and the problem management. Once you either you can do an immediate fix like following an emergency incident management process, or a regular incident management process based on the severity. Once you fix the issue, then you initiate the CAPA, corrective action and preventive action. And the corrective action is to fix the issue. Preventive action is to set up a control so that it does not reoccur. And then the problem management. Problem management is the ITIL term. And there is a DR and BC management, that is disaster recovery and business continuity. Incident is something sometimes can be a major incident and that allows that makes your system not available for the users, for a certain users in the certain region, or users in the entire organization. It could be different. So that's when your disaster recovery and business continuity plans get kickstarted, right? So the deviation, many times it's interchangeable with incident, but incident is more of a system-based terminology where any error occurs. Deviation is something that you deviate from the defined process. Sometimes it can be interchangeably used with incident, or it depends on organization's SOP. Sometimes you may call incident as a deviation. But the right term will be, yes, deviation is a deviation from the planned process or approved process. But incident is something that caused by the failure of the system or the error that is occurring in the system. Sometimes the equipment is not working, the part is failed, and the server is down. And the patch is the latest patch is causing a feature issue in a new feature. So those are the things that are called incident. Okay. The DRBC, that is disaster recovery and business continuity, is again as an outcome of the as an action item of the incident, depending on the severity of the incident. The entire service management process has to be managed, governed by the risk management process, the document management process, audit and review process. So these processes will be always governing the entire service management process. That's a question I see. What's the right term if the test script steps are mixed up, like step 4 had to be done? See, testing is always defined in the sequence. That's where you sometimes create multiple scripts as well, and within the script, again, the steps have to be written in sequence. That's what your protocol or the test strategy will say. What scripts, or even within the individual scripts, you will say the prerequisites before you execute this script. What scripts needs to be executed before, and you will also clearly say if the steps have to be executed in sequence, you will have to say in the script itself that the steps have to be executed in sequence. Some scripts, like which is not process based, like verifying all the documentation and other things, can be executed in any way. There you can make a note that need not be executed in a sequence. Who has to perform the periodic review of the software, admin, QA, or user? If admin is performing the periodic review, do we need to verify that admin has not done or not done any change configuration settings? Yeah, that's a good question. Who needs to perform the periodic review? So generally, periodic review is the process, or in for that matter, any process is defined by quality assurance. Um, uh, it is always recommended to perform the periodic review by the team who is knowledgeable in the system. Let me define some roles for you to be clear. In general, the roles like system owner, process owner, user, quality assurance. These are the roles, different roles in any, when we define a system, these are the important roles. User is the one who is using the system. Process owner is the role who is responsible for the process and the data. And the system owner is the person who is responsible for the management of the system. For example, if it's any IT system or a software system, then that person who manages the system is called the system owner, and then the quality assurance. Generally, the periodic review is the responsibility of the system owner and driven by quality assurance. The process will be initiated by the quality assurance, but people will be giving inputs. The data process owner will give the inputs on the process side, there is no deviation, and the system owner will give system related change requests, process deviations and everything. And then all the input will be given to a quality assurance. Most times the validation team will do the review of the inputs that we received from the system owner and the process owner and the data owner and the user, and will do the review and then prepare the final periodic review summary and then share it with QA for the final approval. Is periodic review required for validation or system lifecycle documents? Yes, periodic review will also assess if the documentation are current and are meeting the current policies. For example, your organization policy and validation standard might have changed in the recent time, and the system that you validated 10 years ago may not meet the current standards. So at the time, you will verify whether have you produced all the documents as required by your system. Yes, you will cover that in your periodic review. Additionally, the validation documents can be categorized into two categories. One is a historical document, the other one is a living document. I think this concept will be important for you all to understand what can change, what will not change. Always categorize a document as a historical document or a living document. Historical documents are something that are prepared to demonstrate the state of the system at that time. The living document is something is generated to reflect the system at any point of time. For example, user requirements is a living document. User requirement has to be always current. If I created 10 years before, then the user requirement is the same. Even if I look at after 10 years, the user requirement will be the same. The same goes with the design as well. The same goes with SOPs and system description. So all these are living documents. Historical document are something which reflects only the state of the system at that time. So for example, test records, anything what we tested in our initial validation cannot be changed. So we cannot go back and change if something has gone wrong during our periodic review. If we identify, yeah, this is not correct, yet that has to be fixed, but we cannot go back and change the document. What we will do is we will do a testing again and then create an additional record. Any record is a historical document. For that matter, validation plan itself is a historical document. It is live only during the phase of validation, but once the validation is completed, the validation plan is a historical document. The validation plan is only will say what strategy that we followed when we validated the system for the very first time. Sometimes I've seen in some organizations, people are revising the validation plan. Validation plan will have to be generated for each validation or for each change, but will not be revised. Because validation plan is a historical document, it is live only during the phase of the validation. Once the validation is completed, the validation plan will go as a historical document to demonstrate to the auditors this was the approach that we followed when we validated our system. We may do a revalidation to meet our current standards. At the time, we will prepare a new validation document, but we will not revise the validation plan. That will be a new validation plan. Historical documents will never be retired. It will only will retire when the system is retired. Documents like user requirement specification design documents will be revised. When we revise a document, the older revisions go obsolete. The current revision will reflect the current state of the system. So understand that clarity so that you will know what document to revise, what document to retire. So there's a question. So there's a part of system periodic review or a separate activity. Periodic review is a operational process. When we summarize the validation, when we set up all the operational process, the phase that right now we are talking, we will set up the periodic review process in place. It's a support process. During the migration, validation plan should be revised. Yes, validation plan can be revised only during the phase of the validation. Once the validation is done, validation plan will go as a historical document. See, for example, when you define a validation plan at the time of finalization of the requirements. During the phase of the design, you identified some requirements could not be met, and then you are revising your requirements. At the time, if you see there's an impact to the validation plan and some of the deliverables, then you will revise the validation plan. That is a revision, because within that project phase, your strategy changes, hence you are revising. By revising the validation plan, you are making the old validation plan obsolete and you are bringing the revised validation plan effective. Once that is implemented and summary report is done, for the next time, if you want to validate for the upgrade, you will not go back and change the old validation plan. You will create a new validation plan for the upgrade. And sometimes you may not revise the validation plan even if you have identified some changes to the validation plan, depending on the time and then the urgency. In such scenarios, you can always summarize that planned deviations from the validation plan. You will have a section in the summary report to define where and all you deviated from the plan. Even though there is that option for you to do that, when you have multiple changes or multiple deviations from your original validation plan, that shows your I mean, the planning is not done well. So that itself can be observation. So it is not highly recommended to document multiple deviations from your validation plan. But yes, there is an option that if you have deviated from your validation plan, if it's minor, then you can always document in your summary report and close as well without revising your validation plan. Is revision and addendum both are same? Not exactly. Addendum adds something what we missed into the plan. Anytime we can add addendum to the document. Revision revises the entire document and obsoletes the whole version. In addendum, the same version will be effective and there is an additional content added to the document. But revision will make the previous content obsolete. Yeah, I see a question. Please repeat a bit about the validation plan not being updated or for each validation. Hope that helps whatever I said. Just to summarize, validation plan is a historical document once the summary report is created. But during the validation, it is a living document. Some of the living documents include user requirements, design. The historical documents are the test records, summary report, validation plan after the validation is completed. All these are historical documents. You don't revise them. You only if you find any issue in the testing as a part of your periodic review, you will not go and revise your test record. You will create a new test record. Okay, so moving on with the incident management. I'm not going to go in detail about this because we discussed briefly. Typically, the incident management process will identify and log the incident and evaluate the incident based on and identify the severity, and then resolve the incident depending on the severity. The high severe incidents can follow the emergency resolution process, and normal severity will go with the normal process, and then the incident will be closed. Corrective action, preventive action. So this is a very important quality management process that will have to be set up properly in every organization. Identifying issue is not a challenge, but how we address is what will be looked at by the quality management system and by the auditors. Once the problem is identified, typically CAPA will follow the incident. Every incident has to be followed with the CAPA. So please go back and check. Again, incident, what we classify as an incident is again a question. If you have rightly classified the incidents, all the unexpected behavior of the system has to be documented in the incident management process, and that will be followed by a CAPA. CAPA again can be grouped for the similar nature of the incidents, and then if you repeatedly see some of the incidents reoccurring, that may trigger a change request process. So this is how the support management processes are interlinked. When you see a repeated incidents and that trigger a CAPA, and then there's something not good, then that means that something needs to be changed. So that will trigger a change management process. In general, the CAPA will be The first step of the COPA is to provide the fix to the issue, and then perform the root cause analysis, then determine the preventive actions, then implement the preventive actions. Preventive actions can be a quick fix, a process control, or could be a change management in the system. Yeah. So COPAs sometimes trigger a change management process based on the corrective actions. The change management can directly come from any additional requirements from the user or from the additional requirements or the UI change or a process change or anything it could be. It can either come from a COPA or from completely a new requirement. All the changes have to be assessed for the impact. Again, the change management can be as big as an entire validation process or as small as a small fix to the system. And that's the reason the impact assessment and the risk assessment is very important in the risk management process. Every change we cannot deal as the same. But all the change management has to be logged properly. That's where the configuration management system is important. The configuration management process is intended to demonstrate or keep the system as it is in the current state. When we validate the system and then release the system, we have all the configurations documented in the design. But we go on doing multiple changes, and if we don't change any of our design document or any configuration management system, depending on size of the system, we may have just a design document or a configuration management system. If you don't update that after some 10 change management process, if somebody else wants to look at the system, your configuration management or the design document will not be current. So this is where the impact assessment has to be done. What documents and what systems are impacted due to the change has to be properly assessed and has to be properly verified before closing the change. All those such changes are made in the system. So change management has to be assessed for the impact and has to be assessed for the risk, and rest follows the typical SDLC. Yeah. Yeah, track-wise, yeah, there are now many tools used for COPA management, but tools are not that important. The way how we have defined our processes is more important. Now you have anything. Now you can build any tool that you want to build, meet your process requirements. Operational change configuration management. Yeah, we just talked about it. Whenever a change is happening, this has to be looked in another way. There could be some configuration changes may happen without a change. That is the deviation from the process. Such things have to be identified during the periodic review. Verifying configuration management system as a part of the periodic review is one requirement that comes due to this. So ideally, all the changes to the system has to be handled by change management process. Whenever you implement a change management process, you have to ensure your configuration management is rightly updated. And during the periodic review, if you identify your configuration is not reflecting or changed without a proper change management process, that's something that you will fix it with a COPA. Yeah, so sometimes the configuration management may not be understood rightly by all. Configuration management, we need to first of all identify what needs to be under the configuration management. Like for example, typically in the infrastructure space, there's a service now is used for maintaining all of the configuration management, but not many organizations keep the service now up to date. In a system, take an example of even TrackWise itself, right? So it will have all the application versions and then how many instances of the application. and then the infrastructure, the how many servers are used, and what is the backup tool being used, and what is the restore tool being used. So the configuration management system is intended to maintain the current version of each of these systems that we talked about in the service now. For example, the software version, the minor version, whenever we do a change to the application, those things have to be updated in the configuration management system or a design document, whatever the way, however the way that you are maintaining your configuration management, that has to be updated. For larger systems, and there can be a number of components in the application, each of the component has to be properly maintained in either nowadays there are tools for managing the configuration, but for simpler systems, simple documentation is good enough. Yeah, we came to the area where we already discussed much. Periodic review is one of the support process. And this helps maintain the system in the validated state. System validation is the objective, but maintaining the validated state is even more important. That's where the periodic review helps. Now, it's not just the support process, it is also a requirement from different regulations like European regulations as well as US regulations. So now it is a mandatory requirement as well by the regulation as well. You define the periodic review process, define what controls need to be verified for different systems, and produce a report, have it reviewed, and have it approved. If there are any CAPA initiated by the periodic review, track and follow the CAPA under your quality management system. Yeah. Backup and restore process. This is very key for the data-driven world now. If we lose any data, that is a risk to the business, right? Any clinical data that is lost, right? So we cannot afford to have data loss. Ideally, not ideally, I mean, every organization should have a backup and restore process. All the backup process should define the backup frequency, like how frequently the backup is done, and then the type of backup, whether it's an incremental backup or a full backup or a screenshot. I mean, the system shots are of the backup, or it could be any type of the backup. And again, the frequency, it could be daily, incremental, weekly, full backup, monthly, full backup, depending on the criticality of the data. And then the backup SOP should define what is the RTO and RPO, recovery time objective and recovery point objective. Recovery time objective is something that what is the time that will be lost when we restore the backup. Recovery point objective is till what state of the system we can recover back is the recovery point objective. It depends on the system criticality. For some systems, it has to be a couple of hours only. We can afford to lose any data or the state, but that has to come from the assessment. And then you will have to document the backup procedure, and you will say what tool you are using and what frequency and how it is all configured. And you will have to keep a monitoring process in place. If the auto backup fails, typically it will be retrying. Probably after a couple of retries, the backup may be failed. In such scenarios, we'll have to raise an incident. Backup failure is an incident that has to be handled. If this incident is repeating, then that has to be looked into to see what change needs to be applied in place. And then restore process. A restore process has to be documenting how to restore the system in case of a disaster. But that process has to be periodically tested. Can take a different backup at different times and then try restoring the data in a separate environment and then see if it works. The same way, backup as well has to be periodically assessed. The periodic review of the backup can be done by the periodic testing of the actual restore test, or sometimes doing a data integrity test that can be run by the backup software itself to verify the integrity of the data is still holding good. That will run every month, and the actual restore can be done once in a year or once in 2 years, depending on the risk of the system. Is secondary backup necessary? Yes, secondary backup is for your DR and BCP. We'll talk about it in a minute. What is backup approach for cloud systems? Yeah. Recently I've seen just because the systems are hosted in cloud doesn't mean that we are not responsible for the cloud. Many organizations they don't even document the backup process, assuming that it's in cloud. Even if it is in cloud, there must be agreements. The cloud service provider only gives the platform, but only based on the SLAs. We need to define what is our backup frequency and what is our backup requirement, and based on that only the cloud service provider will perform the backup, and still the regular backups are in our control. Generally the cloud service provider provides only in case of a disaster. But in case a certain data is missed, if you want to restore, that's still in our control. Even with the cloud service provider, the user is supposed to have a backup and restore process in place. Backup restore process, data integrity verification, periodic restore test is all mandatory. Yeah, business continuity and management. This can be dealt at the organization level, at the system level. For software service providers, this is at the organization level, but for license industry, this will be at the system level. In case if any system fails, for example, regulatory information management system or a BMR batch manufacturing record system or any other clinical trial database management system, if it fails, these are the systems that needs to have business continuity management in place. A business continuity plan process has to be written at the time of operations process, and then a plan has to be drafted that will say every year or every 2 year or every 3 year the drill DR and BCP drill has to be performed, and the organization is supposed to perform the test of the DR and BCP, how free and to confirm to what was defined as RTO and RPO, whether we were able to recover the system within the specified timelines. We will assess and then do a periodic testing. So this is where the secondary backup is required. See, the secondary backup requirement is coming from the risk of the system. Are we defining a disaster possibility that the entire facility can go into flood or fire or earthquake? In such scenarios, nothing is accessible. When we see such risks for the system, then offsite backup is necessary, and that has to come from the risk management of the system. To our BC initiative, yes. BC was not a common thing until few years, but I have seen during the Chennai floods in 2015 or 16 and all, we have seen a couple of times BC was initiated. Nowadays, it's not very uncommon. So don't underestimate the business continuity and disaster recovery. Yeah, it is difficult, but it is happening nowadays. It's not something that doesn't happen. And I have seen few instances of executing this. So it is not very uncommon now. If you as an auditor or if you are a quality assurance person or if you are a validation person, ensure that there is a business continuity process, or at least the risks are documented, or at least say that the system do not have that risk of failing, or you will not end up such an such system, or in such case you have this backup. So at least something has to be documented. But for major systems like the clinical data management or study systems, or the BMR systems, electronic documents, with no doubt we need to have a business continuity management in place. Yeah, security management. Many times security, probably in non-life sciences or non-pharma organizations, security is a separate process. And even in pharma companies, there is a separate, typically IT security team that handles the security. But the security, we need to, I would always recommend to integrate the process. Sometimes they may operate differently. The IT security, that is ISO 27001 compliance and other security regulations. But the system support process needs to be aligned with that security management process in the life sciences industries. The security threats needs to be identified. It could be it could pose a data loss, or it could pose a business risk like losing the company private information, like critical information. So align your security process with the organization's information security management system. Don't try to bring in a new process that creates pockets within the organization. Try to align with the IT security process. I've seen some organizations, whenever a GXP assessment is done, during the same time as SOX assessment, as well as a security assessment, as well as a data privacy assessment, all things will be done at the same time. So we don't do separate processes for different requirements. Consider everything. That's when we talked about our support processes as well. Don't just focus on GXP for the effective management of the controls in the system. It's always recommended to integrate the process, but this is at the organization level. As an individual, we cannot do, but you can always recommend to assess the risk management, data privacy risk, security risk, and then yeah, SOX related requirements if it is applicable for your organization. So everything is a interlinked process. You don't need to have a separate process for each of these areas. Yeah, I'll try to share the presentation. Yeah, and try to have a simple integrated process in place that will avoid many duplicates in any of these areas. The security or data privacy, or they don't do anything different, right? So the objective is a little different, but for the common objective, the process is the same. The information security policy should cover the physical security, the access management, logical security. You are recommended to have a process in place or SOP in place that documents the logical access, who has got access to what in the system. You need to have a clearly documented SOP in place. Even the security, even the admin who has got access to anything in the system, how the access can be utilized has to be properly documented in the administration, security administration SOP. See, everything, whatever I say, needs to be scaled based on the system size. Everything is not applicable for every system. That's where the risk assessment and the critical thinking comes into picture. But we are talking about everything right now. But you need to think and then apply based on the need and the scale. You need to scale based on your system. The role-based access has to be properly documented. Even if the admin has got access, we need to clearly state when admin can use the admin login. If there is unnecessary or with no purpose, there is admin login, that has to be identified during the periodic review and control. Yeah, definitely the antivirus intrusion detection, vulnerability assessment, penetration testing, all that are applicable depending on the risk of the system. You assess the risk. That's where I was saying the system operations management process is key to define what is needed for your system and document in the SOP. So if you have everything documented, you don't need to defend during the audits. The document will speak. Yeah, we are here in the system administration process. It's always recommended to write a SOP for the system administration and cover all the administrative processes like addition of some memory, addition of some storage, addition of user management, addition of access, removal of the user, patch management. All that can be documented in the system administration so that you avoid creating change management for change request for each of the requests. You can also do some kind of assessment if you want to simplify the process in your organization. You can assess all the where frequently you are doing the change managements, and then if there are some repeated activities, you can create a normal change request or make it a SOP. SOP doesn't mean that we will do anything without a record. We are just avoiding the approvals for performing that activity, but logs must be present. Clearly understand the movement from the change request to SOP. It doesn't eliminate from logging your actions. It just simplifies the approval process. You don't need approval for a regular activity that you are supposed to do every time. So we are saving the time in approval. Yeah. Archival and retrieval. This is where there was a question before. When we archive a data, either to save the memory and the storage size, or when we retire the system, the important requirement is to retrievability of the data. You should periodically, if you are retiring any system and archive the data, you should have a process in place to retrieve the data and do the testing that the data is retrievable and accessible. It could be either a data integrity check run or a actual retrieval into the real system and then verified. Depending on the criticality, you can define the frequency. This can be again verified in your periodic review process. When we archive the data, definitely the data is important, but we should also verify if the data can be retrieved. This is the process that defines this. See, these are like high level process flows. Like you can always expand this to meet your organization needs. Whatever we discussed so far is all the support process requirements. We spent actually more time in document and talking about the operational process than the validation. You can see the operation is actually as good as important to maintain the validated state of the system. And sometimes when there are many changes coming in, this becomes even more important. Okay. So that is all mostly about the validation. Then I just wanted to briefly cover some of the basics in the GXP. I intentionally moved these slides a little later. I will quickly run past through for somebody who wants to know what is GXP and some of the regulations governing this process. Where do we get the requirement for validation? All we'll briefly look. GXP stands for good practices. It could be a good clinical practice or a good distribution practice or a good laboratory practice or a good manufacturing practice. C in front of it says that the current good manufacturing practices or current distribution practices. Right, so the GXP is a general term that we use it for referring any good practices in the life sciences industry. Many times we use just say GXP system or a GXP regulation or a GXP compliance. Like we need to what we mean by that is when we say a GXP regulation, it is a regulation that is by the Food and Drugs Authority by different countries. The regulations around the manufacturing, distribution, clinical, and laboratory studies. So any regulation from the FDAs of different countries are in general called GXP regulation. When we say GXP regulation, that means it's a regulation surrounding the license industry. When we say GXP compliance, we say it's the complying to those regulations. That is meeting all applicable pharmaceutical and associated life sciences and regulatory requirements. That is what we call as a GXP compliance. So there are guidelines for food, drug, and medical devices and cosmetics. And that's where the Food and Drug authorities in different countries set up their regulations for. The objective of the GXP regulations or the guidelines is to ensure the product is safe and meets the intended use. So that's what we saw initially, do not kill people. So all the regulations are coming with the intention of do not kill people, and at the end we are the end users. So that's when that's how our critical thinking has to be also aligned to. At times you don't need to spend too much. See, knowing more of concepts is not to implement more controls unnecessarily. It's also to enable you to decide where only we need controls and eliminate unnecessary controls in the place. A good validation person can do this. You can always question yourself, why do we need to do so much when there is no big risk associated with it? So always think from that aspect as well. Knowing many controls and the regulations is not only to enforce the controls, but also to look at where we need the controls. The most central aspects of the GXP is like traceability, accountability, and documentation. Yeah, that's what we are throughout looking at. GXP requires companies in the pharmaceutical industry to introduce their products into the market with detailed, completed, and traceable description of their product's production process. This includes operations affecting product quality performed during the manufacture and distribution of the particular drug. Just briefly talk about, this is a slide about different phases in a life sciences industry. We'll briefly touch upon so that you understand where what regulation is applicable. With the recent corona, people might be knowing now how a development process happens in the drug discovery. Until then, not many were made aware of the entire drug development process. At least now we know at least how things are happening. So initially, once a disease is identified, typically the protein it will be isolated from the body, and then that will be used to identify the chemical which can treat the disease. So that's the very initial phase of identification of the drug. Then preclinical study will be performed. Typically, the preclinical study will go for up to 1 to 3 years. That is before testing the drug with human. That drugs will be tested with animals. Once if it is identified to be safe, you need to understand the statement. It is identified to be safe. Then only the phase moves into the scale up and formulation of the drugs, and then go for the initial registration of the drug to the regulatory bodies, that is filing IND, and then the human clinical trial can start. Human clinical trial can range from 2 to 10 years. And that's when the additional regulation of Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act gets in to safeguard the patient insurance and the safety requirements. And that's where the GCP regulations also get into picture. And there's a GLP regulation during the laboratory study of the initial drug identification. And during the human clinical trials, the GCP regulations, that is good clinical practice. The set of regulations that are applied during this phase is all put together called GCP regulations. Once the FDA is approving, then after the clinical trials, and the organization goes and applies the NDA, new drug application. And then FDA takes 2 to 3 years to approve the assessment. They study your data, clinical trial data, and they look for your safety, efficacy of the drug. That is the prime outcome of your clinical study. And FDA takes the approves the document, approves the drug. And once it is approved, then the organizations go for bulk manufacturing. If you look at until right from identification of the disease to identification of the chemical that treats the that is drug, until the FDA approval, the organizations invest without any revenue. It could range from 2 to 15 years. It could fail anytime during the process, and any investment can be a loss. So that's the reason complying with the regulations are very key, so that we don't violate the regulation, and also we meet our intended drug development process. And then the organizations go for the bulk manufacturing. Usually there will be exclusivity for the organization, inventor organization, for the manufacture and sell the drug. After the exclusivity of few years, then the market will be available for the generic manufacturing. So that means the formula will be out. Anybody who applies for the drug manufacturing application, generic drug manufacturing application, then they can do the manufacturing. So at the time, the GDP regulations and the post-marketing study, the drug study does not end there. When we do the clinical trials, even after the FDA approval, there will be a post-marketing study in place, and that's the reason sometimes we see the product recalls. Products sometimes may not cause a safety and efficacy safety issues immediately. Sometimes may be identified later. At the time, once it is identified, the drugs may need to be recalled, and that's where the regulations around product serialization, drug tracking, all comes into picture. So those regulations are grouped together as called GDP regulations. The recent regulation is serialization. So this is around drug adulteration as well as recall to comply with the recall requirements. This is a typical life cycle of a life sciences organization. Different organizations will be focusing on different areas in this whole spectrum of life sciences. This is where the different regulations GLP, GMP, GCP, GDP are centered around. Knowing this will help you where you are working and what regulation you are supposed to comply with. Always try to have a good understanding of the industry that you are working for. Thank you. Yeah. We generally say regulations, regulatory audit, and regulators. So who are the regulators? Like each country have their own regulatory body. US, it's US FDA. For India, it's DGCI, the state level of FDA. For Europe, it's EMEA. I think now it's changed. My slide is not changed. It's EMA. And for UK, it's MHRA. And for Japan, it's MHLW, Ministry of Labor and Healthcare Welfare. And then for Australia, it's TGA, Therapeutic Goods Administration. So every country has their own regulatory body who set the regulations and govern the drug entering into their country. So it's for the country, they need to, it's for the company to comply with the regulation of the country where they are intending to sell the product, not where they are manufacturing the product. Okay, if an organization in India wants to supply a drug to US, then they need to comply with US FDA. If they want to supply drugs to UK, then they need to comply with MHRA. Right? And this is how the regulations work. So these are more regulations. I think it's the same slide. Yeah, I'm going to skip some of the slides, but I can share these with you later. This will help you, and this will give you some information, but may not be good for a presentation. So let's briefly touch upon these GMP, GLP, GCP. GMP is good practices around the manufacturing, generally for the bulk manufacturing of the drug products, the drug APIs, drug intermediates, finished products, formulations, drug formulations, excipients. The regulations around manufacturing of these products is all grouped together is called good manufacturing practices, and the regulations surrounding this all called GMP regulations. Again, it's a GMP requirements are largely common sense practice. This is where the quality management system has to be built in during the manufacturing of the product. Any failure to comply with the GMP regulations may result in product banning, including recall or fines. What are the controls that are required for a GMP that include right from including raw materials to buildings and facilities, productions and process controls, in-process testings and controls, packaging and labeling operations, laboratory controls, stability testing, production record review, deviations and investigations, responsibility and authority of the quality control, complaint handling, management of records and reports, and auditing. So GMP controls will be focusing on all of these areas, and you need to ensure that you have control. If you are in the manufacturing industry and if you are focusing on the validation controls and the process controls in the GMP, just look into these areas that you have sufficient controls around. Some of the regulations that you need to comply depending on where you sell the drug. In US FDA, it's 21 CFR Part 210 and 211. For ICH is the International Conference for Harmonization that provides a general guideline for most of the European countries. WHO provides again a good practice. TGA for Australia. PICS is again for many of the Europe countries. So understand these regulations. You need to know what regulation that you are supposed to comply with, and specifically understand the regulations for those countries. Same way, GLP is the set of practices around the laboratories. The laboratory study could be during the clinical trial phase where the drug is tested in the laboratory, and also during the drug manufacturing, bulk manufacturing phase where the quality control is performing the lab tests for the products that are being developed. The GLP regulations are applied in both areas. The GLP requirements go into and the device must be proven safe for non-clinical or toxicity studies before it can be tested for safety. So this is during the preclinical studies. The good laboratory practice ensures that the non-clinical study has been conducted properly, that collect the data is valid and of high quality. GLP deals with the organization, process, and conditions under which studies are planned, performed, monitored, and recorded, reported. So these are the controls that are related to the preclinical studies, that is non-clinical studies. Once a non-clinical study has been fully documented, reviewed, and approved, testing in humans can begin. So until then, the GLP regulations control the data, and not only here and during the bulk manufacturing as well, the tests should follow the GLP requirements. The GLP requirements and the regulations typically control around the test facility, organization, and personnel, quality assurance program, facilities and general controls, apparatus, material, and reagents, test systems, test reference items, and this is also very important, standard operating procedures, performance of the study, reporting of study results, storage and retention of records and materials. All your storage and retention, drug-related retention requirements come from this storage and retention study. Some of the regulations around the GLP include FDA, it's 21 CFR Part 58. For EU, it's EU Directive 9912 EC. OECD is a again set of countries based on the economy group together. There are about 37 countries in the OECD, and OECD has got many guidelines. Good clinical practice or the set of regulations around the clinical study when performing the clinical trials on human. Good clinical practice is an international ethical scientific quality standard for designing, conducting, recording, and reporting trials that involve human participants. So there is a ethical control is also into a picture because the drug is tested on humans, which is not in the which is not tested fully. So that's where the additional regulations like HIPAA and the ethics control board and all getting into picture. Compliance with the standard provides public assurance that the rights, safety, and well-being of the trial subjects are protected, consistent with the principles that have their own origin in the Declaration of Helsinki. And that is the clinical trial data are credible. So this is something that it's good to remember, the Declaration of Helsinki. That's where the controls for the clinical trials have been identified to document. The concerns for the GCP regulations for the trials emerged in response to the medical tragedies such as the discovery of effects of thalidomide in pregnancy in 1960s, which highlighted the worldwide need for central records of trials that are occurring. So this is why it's very important why we do such regulations, right? So many of the human systems are always reactive. Once we some issue, then we bring in the control. The reasons, if we understand, then we will be able to better do our job. In addition to the problems have arisen without obtaining the marketing authorizations for the drugs across different countries, where different versions of GCP are being adhered to, with a common piece of legislation, this should be avoided. So this is a very important reason why GCP regulations are in place. And at this stage, the drug is also tested on the human subjects when the drug is not fully tested. The purpose of GCP is to protect the patient participants or the subjects involved in the trials, to ensure the credibility of the data generated during the trial, because all the authorities approve the drug based on the data that is being submitted to them. So the validation controls, if you are in the area where managing the validation for the GCP, your focus should be around data integrity and against the data fraudulent actions. You have to definitely focus on, and of course the disaster recovery and the business continuity. We cannot afford to lose any data that is generated during the trial. So everything is very critical in this GCP requirements. Ethics. Clinical trials should be conducted in accordance with the ethical principles stated in the Declaration of Helsinki and that are consistent with GCP and regulatory requirements. Of course, there's a risk versus benefit. All the drugs are approved based on the risk versus benefit. A cancer drug cannot be stopped for a hair loss, right? There's a side effect of hair loss when we take the cancer drug, but treating cancer is more important. So there is also the COVID has to be approved in a faster pace to meet the need. Always there's a risk versus trial benefit applied. It all depends on how much of a control that we have and how we demonstrate the trial to the regulatory body is very important. The trial participants, the rights and safety and well-being of the trial participants are the most important consideration and should prevail over the interests of science and society. And that is definitely the key. Information on the medicinal product. The available non-clinical and clinical information on an investigational medicinal product should be adequate to support the proposed clinical trial. And good quality trials. Clinical trials should be scientifically sound and be described in a clear, detailed protocol. So the clinical trial protocol should define the justification of the study methodology that is adopted and being used during the study. And that's a study protocol is a very key document that defines why. Compliance with the study protocol. Yes, trial should be conducted in compliance with the protocol that has received ethics committee and regulatory approval. So you can see there's ethics committee as well and regulatory approval as well in the study protocol. As we have this human subjects as a participants for the trial. Some of the regulations that are governing the JCP regulations include the 21 CFR Part 50, 54, 56. For ICH, it's E6. There's R2 currently effective, and R3 the draft guideline is already released for R3, E6 R3. And for EU, it's Directive 2001/20 EC for good clinical practices. And then good documentation practices. This should not be confused with good documentation practices. Actually, this GDP stands for good distribution practices. The set of regulations that are governing during the distribution of the drug is all called good distribution practice. Not to be confused with good documentation practice. GDP is a regulation. That is, distribution is the regulation. Like product recall regulation, serialization requirements all come from this GDP. Some of the requirements include the quality system operated by the distributor of medicinal products to ensure the medicinal products that distribute are authorized in accordance with the community registration, that storage conditions are observed at all times, including during transportation, that contamination from or of the other products is avoided, that an adequate turnover of the stored medicinal products takes place, and that products are stored in appropriately safe and secure areas. So the control over that during the shipment of the drug, many of you might have worked in the distribution area where there are data loggers kept to track the temperature and humidity conditions throughout the shipment of the product and even the storage of the product. The regulations surrounding that, part of it are in the GMP and part of it are actually grouped under GDP regulations. Tracing system should enable the faulty product to be found, and there should be an effective recall procedure. So that's where the serialization requirements comes into picture. And also this avoids any adulteration of the drug, or by any unintended adulteration of the drug can also be avoided when we comply with these regulations. Again, the GDP requirements take into account of personnel, documentation, and premises and delivery to customers, and then the returns. There are guidelines surrounding each of these area, even the returns and delivery to the customers. Until it reaches the end user, the controls have to be complied. Some of the GDP regulations actually is like 21 CFR Part 210 to 11 itself will cover some of the distribution related regulations. And in Europe, GDP it is under 92/25 EEC regarding the wholesale distribution of the drugs and drugs for human consumption. And for United States, Pharmacopoeia 1079 also includes some controls related to the distribution. But majority of these are also GMP regulations. Some of the other good practices that we should be aware, which is not generally, which actually came up in the recent years, include the good engineering practice. This is mostly applied in manufacturing facilities, laboratory, sometimes laboratory facilities, to design and build the manufacturing facilities or the laboratory facilities. The good engineering practices has to be followed. And good automated manufacturing practice is the terminology and the committee under the ISPE. The good practices around the automated manufacturing process. There are no regulations around it, but these are evolved as regulations. I mean, not good practices in alignment with the GXP regulations. And then the good documentation practices that follows the Alcoa principle. We'll see a little more in the good documentation practices in the upcoming slides. And good clinical data management practices. As we have seen, data management is a key in clinical trials. The good clinical data management practice itself is one other practice that we need to understand. Yeah, so this is all about GXPs that we briefly looked at. It took quite some time as well to look at all the regulations. So anybody who is working on one may not work in all the areas of the life science industry, but when you work in your area, please try to understand your scope of regulations and the controls and guidelines surrounding your area. Okay, next, one important topic many of you may be interested. Yeah, that's a good ask. Yeah, before we freshly start with part 11, yeah, let's take a 15-minute break again. So it's 12:30 for me. Let's connect back again in 12:45. And there is maximum of 30 minutes left in this session. We will talk in 21, say for part 11, and we will be able to conclude our whole presentation for today. Thanks for your patience for staying in the call. We'll talk for next 30 minutes after 15 minutes. So can we get started? So it's been quite, we started at 9:30. So it's been 3 hours. So I'll just take 30 more minutes and then we'll conclude for today. And probably if required, we can have some additional sessions later. And if you all find it interesting and you see some information coming, we can plan some special sessions as well, specific to the topic, so that we don't take too much time. We'll just focus on specific points. Yeah. So let's get started with 21 CFR Part 11. So this is a regulation that's been around for 10, 20, 25 years now. So I think 1997 was the first release, and after that there was one clarification or implementation guideline as well published by FDA, as the intention of the 21 CFR Part 11 was not taken rightly. There was a clarification, I think around 2003 or 2004, there was an additional guideline was published by FDA. And now we are still having this 21 CFR Part 11 effective, and controls are better understood now. Let's briefly look at. So it's a code of federal regulations. You all know that Title 21 is under for the life sciences, and then CFR Part 11 is the regulation specific for electronic signature and electronic records. Yeah, it's exactly 1997. The Part 11 became effective in August 20, 1997. The intent was to permit the widest use of electronic technology compatible with the FDA's responsibility to promote and protect the public health. The use of electronic records as well as their submission to the FDA is voluntary. See, the primary intention of the regulation was to promote the use of electronic records and electronic signature, but it was due to the high controls, this was misunderstood and reduced the use of electronic records, and or made the industries too hesitant to go for the electronic submission and made them still be in paper. And that's why FDA issued further compliance policy guide and various draft guidance of the documents to enable the use of enable the implementation of 21 CFR Part 11. And the interpretation was not right in the beginning. It was unnecessarily restricting the use of electronic technology in the manner that it is inconsistent with the FDA stated intent in the issuing the rule. Significantly increase the cost of compliance to an extent that was not contemplated at the time of the rule was drafted, discourage the innovation and the technological advances without providing a significant public health benefit. So this was the interpretation initially when the regulation came into effect. Then there was a guidance, 2003 it was issued. The guidance for the industry, Part 11, electronic records and electronic signature, the scope and application. We'll talk more on how effectively we need to use where 21 CFR Part 11 is applicable. Then further, there are multiple draft guidance documents that you can always refer. I'm not going to go in detail now. Yeah. Before we go and look into the scope and applicability, let's look at some concepts around where it is applicable. The Part 11 applies to records in electronic form that are created, modified, maintained, archived, retrieved, or transmitted under any records requirements set forth in the agency regulations. See, at first look, this may look like everything in electronic form needs to comply with 21 CFR Part 11, but the last statement is set forth in the agency regulations. That's something that we will look at. Will only predicate what needs to be complied with 21 CFR Part 11. Part 11 also applies to electronic records submitted to the agency under the Federal Food and FDA Act and PHS Act. Any submission that goes in electronic form for the drug approval, IND or NDA, anything needs to comply with 21 CFR Part 11. Some of the definitions that you need to understand is predicate rule, electronic records and electronic signature. So what is predicate rule? If we understand this rightly, then in our validation process, we will be able to identify where the 21 CFR Part 11 compliance is required. Predicate rule are something that are set forth in the regulations or in the PHS Act or FDA regulation are called predicate rules. To give you an example, if 21 CFR Part 11 as such only provides the controls and requirements by the regulation, by the regulatory body, but it doesn't tell what record to comply with. So that comes from actually the predicate rule. That is not coming from 21 CFR Part 11. Part 11 tells only the controls that are required to be applied on the electronic signature or electronic signature if used, but it doesn't tell what are those electronic records and what are those signatures that need to comply with this 21 CFR Part 11. That actually comes from the predicate rules. The predicate rules are like 21 CFR Part 210, 211, 58, QMS, and 820. These are the regulations that tells what records have to be maintained or required by the regulatory authorities. Hence, these regulations are called predicate rules. For example, 21 CFR Part 211 will say the batch manufacturing record has to be maintained when for the product is manufactured. And if that record is maintained in the electronic form, then only the 21 CFR Part 11 is applicable. Hence, the 21 CFR Part 211 is predicating what record to be managed, and 21 CFR Part 11 is saying what controls have to be managed, applied. So that's why the 21 CFR Part 210 and 211 becomes a predicate rule, and Part 11 is the actual regulation. Electronic records, anything that is in the text, graphical, data, audio, pictorial form, anything that is created, maintained, modified, archived will be called as electronic record, but that has to be predicated by the GXP regulations. So typically all the GXP regulations are predicate rules. 21 CFR Part 11 is the control that has to be applied if that is maintained in the electronic form. Electronic signature is a symbol or a series of symbols that is executed, adapted, or authorized by an individual to be legally binding equivalent to the individual's handwritten signature. So this can be system electronic signature capability of a system or a digital signature like that we are seeing in DocuSign or Adobe Sign. If rightly governed, then that can be also used as an electronic signature. These are different types of system based on the 21 CFR Part 11. It could be paper-based system. Completely everything is in paper. Hybrid system is where part of it is in electronic form, part of it is in paper form. And sometimes the document could be created in electronic form and can be approved in using electronic signature. Using a paper-based signature. Electronic system is something that is fully electronic. That is, the electronic records. The records are created electronically and also approved electronically. When we define our controls and the 21 CFR Part 11 compliance for our systems, when we validate, understanding these controls are very important. Hence, we can apply the right controls to the right records. Also, we'll understand what is closed system and what is open system. A closed system is something that where the data is controlled by the persons who are responsible for the contents of the electronic records that are in the system. For example, most of the systems like document management system or anything, wherever the owner is responsible for the content of the electronic record in the system, and that's called a closed system. The term system in this definition does not mean an infrastructure, but it is the system. With process, document, everything put together is called a system. Remote access to the electronic records is considered a closed system if the access to the system and data is controlled by the system owner, and if the system is not used to access or transfer any information through the public or online services, the remote access is allowed. But still, as long as the data is controlled by the system owner, the system is still called a closed system. Making a system available online doesn't make the closed system to be an open system. Open system are in which the data or access is not controlled by the organization who are responsible for the content. Typically, the clinical trial studies, this kind of systems will fall into this category. Systems maintained by the internet or any other external network providers are considered to be the open system if access to the electronic records is controlled by the organizations other than the content of owners. I mean, owner of the content. System that provides remote access to transfer of electronic records through a public or online services. That will be again called as a closed system. System that accepts electronic records from customers is an open system. A closed system that resides on a network and that also includes an open system is still closed as long as it does not accept records directly from the open system. As long as there's a control before the data or the record can be managed or modified by a person who is not responsible, owner of the content, and if it is within the closed system, then that can be categorized as a closed systems. Typically, contract manufacturing organizations record that is coming in can be the clinical trial data management study. If study is performed by a different team and then study is managed by a different organization, that will come under the open system. So these are some of the examples of open systems. So what are the actual concerns with the electronic records that made this 21 CFR Part 11 to come in? So if we understand this, this will help us to define the controls for those electronic records. Paper records are permanent, but when we create electronic data, this need not be permanent, right? So things can be changed. So that's a concern. So think through this. When you apply a control for a 21 CFR Part 11 record, what can make it permanent or what can make it equivalent to be permanent? So that's how our logic should be defined for applying the controls. Changes can be seen. If we make any changes to the record that is readily visible in the paper record, because somebody will have to strike through the existing content and write on top of it, and then we'll sign it over that this is the previous content and this is the new content, it's changed by me. So it's readily visible, but this is not the case in the electronic data. Unless we have keep a proper version management system, the old version may be still visible, right? The same goes with the release management systems as well. So the controls, when you define the controls, you need to rightly make so that the changes can be readily seen. Views cannot be changed. The paper records, the way that we see will be seen by anybody else also in the same way. But the databases need not be, the views can be changed. There can be multiple views can be configured. And that may change the interpretation of the data. So your controls need to be set in a way that the interpretation of the data cannot be changed or cannot be different for different viewers. Paper records allow for reconstruction of the study. That is, any raw data on audit trails. So as long as we keep the raw data, we should be able to go back to the original study at any point of a time. That cannot be the case in electronic data unless we put in the controls. So that's where the controls like audit trail, access controls come into picture. So this will give you an idea now what controls that I need to apply for a record that needs to comply with 21 CFR Part 11. The same way, we can look at the concerns with the electronic records. What can go wrong? So this is the typical kind of risk assessment that we find out what can go wrong and then apply the controls. The same logic can be applied anywhere, but right now we are looking at the controls for 21 CFR Part 11. The traditional signatures are unique and belong to an individual. Yeah, and the signatures, until now we identify the transaction based on the signatures. So it's intended to be unique, and it's unique to one individual. The electronic signatures, unless we put in the controls, it need not be unique. So that's where the process and control should establish a uniqueness of the signature and binding to an individual. So those controls have to be established. They appear immediately on the signed record. As we write on the paper, it appears on the paper, but it's not the case with electronic records. But the controls have to make it effective. As we sign, it has to be linked in the database. So when you actually test the electronic signature, your testing should be focused on these controls. And unique across the time. So electronic signature, I mean the paper signature doesn't change over the period. Mostly it is the same for the large period, but electronic signature can be altered unless there is a control in place. And signature stays on the paper. Once we write, it's on the paper, but unless we have the proper controls built in the database, electronic signatures can be modified by the controls. Yeah, and that's a hand. I'll come back just after this slide. And the removal can be identified. If anybody intends to remove the signature by using whiteouts or erase, it's readily visible. But in case of electronic signature, this cannot be readily visible. The differences we are looking at is only because to apply the control and to test before we release the system. So think through what testing will ensure these controls. Paper record, one can sign on behalf of another. The same logic can also be built into electronic signature, but everything needs a control in place. Yeah, I saw someone was raising a hand. I lost the name. Can yeah, okay, probably once we raise it again, then we will talk. Yeah. Yeah. Electronic signatures applicability, records applicability. So records required to be maintained under one or more predicate rules, and that are maintained in electronic form in addition to or instead of the paper format. The electronic copies are relied upon to perform regulated activities. So this is when you initially do the assessment of GXP assessment, it's always recommended to do a 21 CFR Part 11 assessment as well for the system that you are validating to identify if that needs to comply with 21 CFR Part 11. The controls that you will, I mean, the drivers that will help you assess the 21 CFR Part 11 would be like, you need to go back and check what GXP regulation is governing this process, and then what records are to be mandated are required to be maintained in electronic form in the GXP regulation. So don't go by any record that is maintained in electronic form need not comply with 21 CFR Part 11. Only the records that are mandated by the predicate rules or the GXP regulations, and if it is maintained in electronic form, then only this 21 CFR Part 11 is applicable. Again, consciously you can make a decision to develop the record in electronic form and print it in paper and then maintain it in the paper. So that way, that need not comply with 21 CFR Part 11. It's only the security controls until the electronic content is printed into the paper form. So that's the level of control that you will be applying. Also, you need to clearly document in the SOP which version of that record, whether the paper version or the electronic version, are to be relied upon to perform the regulated activities. So that has to be clear and documented in the SOP. There cannot be two sources of the same information. There can be only one source of information. The proper place to document is in the SOP. Please make sure if you have not done that before in your organization, you have to clearly and explicitly say which format of the record will be relied upon to perform the regulatory activities. And any record that is submitted to FDA or FDA will have to, this regulation 21 CFR Part 11 is a regulation by FDA, US FDA, so hence it is applicable for record submission to FDA. Any ANDA or abbreviated new drug application or a new drug application or any annual reports or any periodic reports that we submit, if we are submitting in electronic form, that has to comply with 21 CFR Part 11, apart from the systems that we build and validate. Yeah, electronic records applicability, where hard copy records are maintained to meet the requirements defined in the predicate rules. Again, it always 21 CFR Part 11 cannot exist alone. It always comes with the predicate rule. Only if other regulation says this needs to be maintained in this record needs to be maintained, then only if it is maintained in electronic form, the 21 CFR Part 11 gets into picture. Where a parallel hard copy exists in conjunction with the electronic system, these policies and procedures do not apply if the following conditions are met. If the hard copy system is used for quality decisions for the regulatory compliance, and the electronic record is not used for quality decisions, and if an SOP clearly indicates that the hard copy records is used for the quality decisions, in that case, the electronic records are not applicable. I mean, the electronic signature regulation record application is not applicable. So if you want to get exempted from 21 CFR Part 11, and if your records are created electronically, then you need to ensure these conditions are met. Yeah, these are some of the questions that you can keep in your assessment form, and if any of the answer is yes, then yeah, you will categorize your system is need to be complying with electronic records. But yeah, change the questions as relevant for your area of probably in GLP, GCP, the questions will be different because the business use is different. Here it will be generic. So typically, if it's exactly the same as I was saying, if any record is maintained in electronic form that is required by the predicate rule, then it is an electronic record. It's as simple as that. Some of the requirements that you should write if you have electronic record in your system, you must be able to identify invalid or altered records. Kind of audit trail or record of change you should be able to track. The system must be able to generate accurate and complete copies of records. The data can come from different steps, but the system must be able to generate accurate and complete copies of the record. There must be a access to and a process for retrieving old records, the system archival and retrieval. Access must be limited to authorized users, access management controls. A secure computer-generated timestamp audit trail must be provided. So this is for the changes to the record, identifying changes to the record, the audit trail. And don't try to apply audit trail for everything. That's unnecessary storage, and IT systems, use of IT systems, that's unnecessary. You can always defend why you don't have an audit trail record if you understand the regulation clearly. Access must be limited to the authorized users. Yeah, we saw that. You need to check and verify that operations are occurring in the correct order. Yeah, that's part of your validation process, the sequence of actions. See, these things come into picture because we are talking about the electronic system. Your validation process must ensure that the operations are occurring in the order that it is supposed to be. Check the data is coming from the correct location. Many times this can go wrong. That's where your validation should be focusing on. This is where the understanding of the complete architecture is important for as a validation person. You have to ensure that the data is coming from the right location. There must be procedures to control system use and support, and that's training and security. Sensitive records being transferred via external networks or systems must be encrypted. Again, it says must be encrypted, yes, but again, go back to what is required to be complying with this regulation. A clinical study done with some patient data, and if it is transmitted from one location to the other location, then yes, it must be encrypted. Right, so you need to always go back and check, is it required to be complying with the 21 CFR Part 11, then come back to the control. Don't apply these controls for every record and every electronic record system. The system must be validated to ensure the system control. Yes, of course. Once we identify these requirements, yes, we will validate the system for these requirements. Let's look at the electronic signature applicability. All electronic signatures within the electronic record, even when that record is either not required to be submitted to FDA in electronic form, or that usually does not have a requirement for signature. FDA believes that all electronic signatures in electronic records need to be trustworthy and reliable. E-signs shall only be applied to e-records that are applicable to and in compliance with 21 CFR Part 11. Yeah. So this is important that e-signature will be applicable only if e-record is applicable. And if we are submitting that e-record to the FDA in the electronic form, that is required to be signed by the predicate rule. Not all the records require signature. If you go and look at the 21 CFR Part 210 and 211, there will be a section called reports. You look at what are the reports that are mandated by those regulations, and those regulations also will clearly tell what needs to be signed and by who. Then by the role. So only those